Hi, my name is Ayo Alfonso, and I am a full stack software engineer. I will be taking you through something like a test assignment, and we'll be going through each of the steps. I'll be showing you if you are applying for a job, how do you think about problems? If you are an engineering manager, what is really good about these questions that they asked? Because I think that this was a very good assessment. It's a good assessment. Um, I would also say that if you're a tech founder, this is a video you want to watch just to see how questions are being asked and how to find the right candidates for what you're looking for. If you want us to work together as maybe a part-time CTO for you or a fractional CTO, you can reach out to me on my email, via my email, or we can definitely have a conversation um, through my channel. We can DM me however you want to DM me. I'll be putting my information out there and you can catch up with me. So I'll just jump right into it. And if you have questions, please leave the comments on the video and I'll be reaching out to you. I'll be answering your questions that you have, and probably other people can also answer your questions. So, without much further ado, let me show you. Let's jump into the video first of all. So we have this test. It's a five-part test, and it's a full stack problem. So if you're a full stack, if you're a front end engineer, you're able to focus on the front end bits of it, and if you're a back end engineer, you're able to focus on the back end bits of it. So it says it is recommended that you walk through this part sequentially and communicate your progress to us periodically so that we can see how you work. So I think the idea is for them to know how you are ideating or how you're breaking down this problem into features, from features into solutions, right? Because that's very important in knowing if an engineer can deal with ambiguity, deal with problems without being told specifically what to do. This is sort of has been, broken down to you like in terms of tasks, right? So it's not very, very ambiguous anyway. Um, but I mean, it's just for them to see your process and see if you're working at a particular level, at a senior level or at a mid level. Um, we have made recommendations for the frameworks tools that we would like to use. If you feel particularly strong about any of them, discuss with us. We are happy to be flexible with this. We will evaluate this test with the following parameters: the quality of code, of course, communication and thought process, of course, simplicity of the solutions. Don't add features that have not been requested, and don't over-engineer the solution. That's perfect. And I'll bring up some things during this process that will show where you might actually end up just doing more than what they expect or over engineering the solution. Well, yeah, of course, they're saying that they expect you to use modern paradigms and patterns. They would not evaluate the design, so don't let us spend time doing that. Time taken to complete the test, they will not evaluate that. They'll basically just look at the outcome. So that's an interesting one. I think they give you this particular kind of test is giving you leeway to really show what you know, but don't do too much. Not to do too much. So the first thing is to load a front end to create a front end. Here we are going to be using React. On the back end, we're going to be using Python to process, and the database is going to be Postgres. Um, okay, and I think, by the way, there are two ways you could go about it. You could do a Postgres or you could do an SQLite because they are pretty much the same thing, right? Um, I chose to do an SQLite solution here on my end. Uh, because the queries are not so different, given that it's still an SQL kind of database, right? That's the requirement. From what I can see here, it looks like what they're expecting from you is an SQL database, right? They're not particularly looking for anything that is unique to a Postgres backend, right? So I am implementing a simple SQL. I'm using SQLite. Um, so what else? Display the content as five cards, three in the first row and two in the second row. Assign a different thumbnail on your choice to each document type. All right. So this first two steps, let's go into it and see the what my implementation was. So if I go into um, let's say I go into the front end, right? And I do a yarn. So based on the documentation, you can see my documentation here. There's a Docker documentation, but we're going to go run the app itself. So I'm in the front end now. It says do yarn install. Um, I've done my yarn install already, but I'm just going to do it again just so that you can see how it works. Um, okay, so we are waiting for this to install. All right, great. And we do npm start. All right, guys, so we don't have any items. I'm going to open my database also just to make sure that um, we are getting sort of like the the connection is. So I'm going to open my database also, the SQL database, so we can see everything that we put into the database on what we don't put into the database. So the instruction, first of all, is to make sure that we display the content as five cards, three in the first row and two in the second row. And let me start my backend um, by cding into my backend and doing a start. So from my backend here, the first thing that I need to do is to actually seed the data. So I created a seed so that when I want to start, I can easily load it with this particular data. If you look at this, this is literally what we have here. And I'm just sitting the back end with that, right? And so the moment I start the application or I run this particular file, it will take this data and create it in the SQLite database. And let's run that. Okay, so um, what do we have? So, all right, so it's telling us that it's a unique constraints issue. So, because I'm already working on this, I think the instruction is very clear. It's that I should delete what we already have here, right? And let's start from the beginning. So, because I'm working on this already, so I'm just gonna write changes. If you don't do the right changes there, it doesn't change, or it doesn't write those transactions to the DB on SQLite. So if I do this, let's make sure that everything is fine here. Okay. And open database. What do we have here? We don't have anything. And so if we run this, what do we have? We have all this data, right? And um, if you look at, so we have all this data. So, and if you call this particular route that I created, you have um, this one, get documents. You're able to basically return everything. right? We are returning everything within that particular model, right? So, or that table. So, let's open the backend and then we run this. All right, so we're running the backend. Um, Perfect. So, a couple of things. You can see that there's three cards at the top here and there are two cards beneath here. How did we get that done? I'm just going to take us to the CSS straight, right? Um, we have the card CSS, we have the container CSS, we have the CSS for the body. Um, Now, for the image, I just made it a square and made sure that the images were fitted into this particular area that I created for it, right? That made sure that even images that were not the same dimensions, because not all these images are the same dimensions, they're kind of random. All of them will fit into that cover. Now, the next thing I did was um, I took the card itself. I said, let me use Flexbox because we already have. If you look at this, I defined I defined the um, you can see here. I defined a container, right, to be a flex, right. This is what determines the next thing I'm going to do. So I did a display flex wrap. Now the idea is that um, when when I do when we are when the max width, right, is when the max width is 900 px, we should calculate that we are only going to contain we're going to take 45% of that. The card is going to take 45% of that space, of the space that is given to it. And not only that, there's padding of 20 px that's taken the from the sides, right? And the idea is to keep the card in the center. So if I do something right now, so if I go back to my, let me go back to my, I'm gonna make the screen small, and I'll show you what it looks like to remove that percentage. What happens? Okay. All right. I think this is good. I think you're able to see exactly what I'm saying. So this is the CSS. I'm going to close this. I'm going to close a lot of other things here. And now you can see exactly what I'm saying. All right. That's good. Okay. Um, Now, so with this, what do we have? We have the card for sure. This is how I prove that this is the actual card that we're working with. So, if I do this, you can see that the cursor is here. If I remove the cursor and I come here, you see that that cursor is gone, right? So if I come back and I bring it back, you see that it has come back. All right, so that means we're interacting with the correct CSS. This card set, rule set is actually being applied to this. Um, well, everything here is contained in this card container, right? It's contained in this card container. We have, all right, so we have one, two, three, four, five. All of them being contained in this card container, right? And that means they will be inheriting display flex as the layout for them. Now, when we have a max width of 900, we're expecting to be a certain way. And if we have a max width of 600, we're expecting to be a certain way. The default way it's supposed to be is for it to show like this, right? And how do we make sure that it's going to show three cards and two cards underneath? It's through 25% minus 20px, right? That way, we are only consuming about, see what that looks like. I think if I do this, right? So you can see that you can see that taking out that flex, we're only using what was allocated 25%. So if I do, and this is for each card, don't forget, if I do 45, you see that we've increased how much width that each card is taking, right? And 45 plus 45 is 90. So that means we've got a situation where we've got 90, we got each of the cards consuming 90% of the space, 45% of the space given, right? And on each row, by the way, on each row, and minus 20px, right? So if I try to do an inspect, right? Let's see if I can drag this out here like this, because I really want you to understand what the CSS is doing there. So if we have this, right? Don't forget that this is the container. This is the container, not the entirety of this. This is the container. Now, the container is a flex box layout. The next thing you want to know is what's the flex rule for each of the cards. First of all, we set the gaps between them, right? And if you look at that, that is not just in between the cards, but also adjacent, right? So if I do this, you see that that's what the gap is doing there. Also, we're using this to justify it to the center, just for it to look good, right? Because we don't want it to just organize or align to the left or to the right. We want it to be in the center, right? Um, I think that's pretty much it for the main container, right? But looking at this one, for the flex for each of the cards, you would notice that the first thing that we're doing is we're setting the base, right? The flex base. If you look at each of the cards, right, and you try to look at what this calculation is called the flex basis, right? So we are setting the flex basis to 45% minus 20% px. If I try to increase it, you'll see what that gives us. So let me just undo all the things I've done, right? So with 25%, it means each card is going to take 25%, one quarter, right? But we're going to also keep 20px for ourselves. That automatically means that only three cards can exist in a row because we have 100%, 100%. And so by the time each card takes 25px, right, 25%, and just 20px off, you will see that there won't be a place for another card, and automatically that extra card would have to wrap to the next line. That's pretty much the logic there, right? So let me give you what it looks like. So if I did 15, for example, you see with 15, we are able to allow a fourth card, right? If I do 10, we are able to allow a fourth card. But if I do 33, we are even not even by that time we've already removed a third card from coming on board, right? If I did let's see, if I did 25 back to our original place, you see we're able to do three cards, but we can't possibly do four cards, right? So that's the idea. Again, I'm just going to go over this so that it's very clear what we're trying to achieve here, right? So if I did if I did 33%, right, it would only take two because by the time we add 33 plus 33, we have 66, right? And that 66 is already two cards. That's two cards. We take 20px, right? That 20px that we're taking is already taken from the remaining percentage. That's the remaining 33. So that means the 33 we're supposed to give the last card. We can't give the last card that space. That remaining percent has to has to be stored away, right? Um, and if we did, let's see something that we could possibly do. So say we did 30, right? Okay, so that's what we have. We have the flex defining what should stay on the first row and how many cards should stay on the second row, right? And I did the second part of this, which is the media. Um, um, and I did the second part of this, which is for us to have the responsiveness, right? And if I did this to reduce it to smaller screens, you'd notice something. By by the time we did it into this screen, we have only two cards, and that's because by this point, right, um, we are already increasing the flex basis here to 45%, so that um, we can keep growing this particular card to be bigger on the screen. And so it's 45%. So that means 45 plus 45, that means two cards can stay within there, right? And um, by the time we reduce it to a smaller screen, what happens is that we take 90% and 20 px on both sides, right? So the idea is, again, very simple. The more this goes up, the more the card is taking the entire width, and the more it goes down, the less it's taking the entire width. The idea of us having a 25% here is so that we can accommodate three cards to be specific, because that'll be 75%. And because we've taken 20px off from the last 25%, we won't be able to accommodate the last card. And to always give us three cards on the first row and two cards on the next row based on their requirement. And that was done with CSS. You might do this with JavaScript, but I think by the time you do it with JavaScript, you're already shooting yourself in the foot, because they want you to show that you know how CSS works, right? So what's the next thing? Display placeholder spinner for each image that is loaded. I use very light images, right? From the from this API. I think it's called cat something something, cat as as cat as a service. And so I didn't necessarily need to do a loading spinner because the pages load really fast, extremely fast. And so I was able to I was able to avoid doing that extra work. All right. So what else are we looking at? So that's it for this for that. So that's it for the CSS, right? We can go into other things now. I'm just going to undo all the things we've done here. All right. So now we can go into the main app itself. And now this is where things get very interesting, right? Um, the very first thing you want to see, or the very first thing you want to start to think about is I have to do a, um, I have to do, I have to display all these cards, but I want to make them interactive. The instruction here says make it so that clicking on a card displays the image as an overlay in in the middle of the web page. Make it so that escaping closes the image and add a README file to explain how to run it. All right, so if I click on this, it shows the card, and if I click on escape, it closes. Now, how did we do that in the code itself? Very simple. Um, List of all the images. I put the overlay right beside the list as a component, but it's hidden. Now, this is overlay image. I think this could be actually written as show overlay image just for a better word to describe it. And this is here, this is here. Okay. And if you click on this, this should still be working. All right, great. Now, so the idea is that when the user clicks on a particular image, we are able to show the raw file of that image um, here. And if we click on the outside, we are setting null, all right, and it disappears. Quite simple. Um, so the first thing you want to do is make sure that when you click, we are sending, we click, we created this list, but we are also setting a function and passing that as the on click so that when the user clicks on it, this is a function. I just wrapped it on a use callback. I would explain the reason why I'm using the use callback. And the idea is that when the user clicks on the image, right, what they have to do is what we have to do is basically send the particular card that was clicked to the to this particular use state. And once we have this, we then show the user what image of the card was clicked. Actually, looking at this now, I realize that it's not a boolean. If it was a boolean, then sure, we can leave it. We can write show overlay image. But in this case, we are not dealing with a boolean. We're dealing with the actual image, right? So we should definitely leave it as this, right? Okay. So having said that, what we've done is that we've successfully created a function that would loop through the thumbnails, right, of image, make sure that we're setting the correct type, and display that image when we click on the cards. Now, sometimes, or most times actually, the image will actually be on the cards object itself. So we would not need to do all of that really. In our case, because we have the images on a in a different object, we just look, we just do a look, just look into that. All right. So, by the way, the use callback. So let me dive into. So the use callback is used to make sure that this particular function is not run every time we refresh this React, or the React component has to refresh, right? And it doesn't have to do anything, or it doesn't have to, you know, set any of these functions or anything. So it makes the page very performant, right? Same thing with this. This especially because it's dealing with the arrays, right? So we don't want to create this all over again from the beginning, especially when you have arrays that are as big as, imagine you have an array set that's big as 1,000, 5,000. This starts to become a problem for the page. So to prevent that, we do use the reuse callback and all this calculation where it's like moving an item from one place to another. It will be so delicious by the time you use your use callback. Why? Because it's calculated that and it's not going to do that particular horrible calculation again all over again from the beginning. Um, Now, apart from those, I think those are the major things that you want to do based on the instruction that is giving us, right? So we have, of course, we have the cuts now, and what else are we looking at? If you're a backend developer, create a Postgres SQL or SQL table that holds data that was in the static JSON. Okay, all right, great. So initially, um, when I started the project, I saw this array and I literally just wrote it here, right, as an array, and I started working with it, right. I just defined it and I started working with it. But because of this particular step, I had to take this array and actually create it in the SQLite database itself. And the way I did that, I think I mentioned already, it's literally in the code. I wrote a I wrote a migration file, right? So that when I want to start, I don't have to, I just have to run that file and everything is going to pour, every all the data that I need will be poured into the database. So this is the data that I need to start, and it's already pointing to the SQL database. It's a simple file here, and once I run this, it would kickstart my database with the data I need, and I'll be able to run my app. For example, when we started this process, you will notice that you saw on the first page you saw no items, right? That's when you start a project and there's nothing, no cat in the database, and I have to run that particular file for things to start. Okay, so having said that, um, all I had to do to create a database was this, right? This file. So the first file was to set up and create the seed for the database. This is this is a way of creating database and injecting database into the application. So you can see that we're using something called Tortoise, right? So Tortoise helps us to actually connect our app to the database, right? And the easy way to do this is basically taking so Tortoise helps us to connect our database into the app, right? And the way to do that is just define the app, right? You can see me defining with fast API. This is just the type and the DB URL, which is the file name here, the models, right? So there'll be this is where we're defining the model, right? The generate schema at the session. So this is just configuration that you have to put along with Tortoise. And once you do the registration of of Tortoise, you're good to go. Now, where do we call the initiate database, right? Um, in the main.py file. Now, the main.py file is where everything starts. That's where we start and we define the Swagger documentation. That's where we define the origins that we are accepting. That's where we define the course. If you hear about course a lot. And when you do that, what we are doing is we are letting the user know, or whoever is going to be the engineer working with this, know that this is the entry point for this file. This is where everything starts. So it could be main.py. That's what most people use. You don't want to use a random name. You want to use a name that everybody is used to so that they can intuitively navigate your app the way you want them to. Something interesting you want to see that I've done here is I defined the prefix of the API at this level also because Many times, what we would need to do is define multiple versions as our product grows. So sometimes, because especially for apps that grow into bigger products being used by external resources, sometimes some routes need to be deprecated for many reasons, for whatever reasons. One, it could be that a new technology is being used. For example, maybe the second route is using GraphQL, the other route was just using direct REST. Or, maybe the other one is used by, is it has more capacity or capabilities, or is more secure. And so the team is thinking of, okay, let's move into a more secure, you know, way of doing things. So that third API will probably be having all the security configurations and all those things. And you would have to phase out the first version. So that is what this is very good for. And so it's a common pattern. You version your APIs just to make sure that in the future you're able to move to newer APIs that don't come along with baggage. And that's the very very common thing with web applications. You always would eventually have technical debt, but it always depends on a lot of factors. Is the technical debt more important than delivering a product to the user at a particular time? And so many other things. The team speed, the morale. Does the team want to work on old problems or work on new things? Right? That's also determines on how you separate or plan a team, organize a team around problems and everything. So moving to this, initiate database. So this is where we actually initiate the database with the app. So everything you define on the app, the routes, the middlewares you want to use, security middleware, what APIs you are allowing to send messages to your endpoint, yada yada, everything is all it all comes together here. And so when you wrap your app around the initial database here, you've injected the database into the app here, and then you run the app on the using Uvicon, right? And the server starts. This is very common. This is a very common pattern, right? In Java, in Python, in JavaScript, Node.js, Express, you would always see this where you've set the routes, you set the middleware, you set everything, and then you now eventually open the app at a particular port and host. So that's the way this works. Um, for the model itself, I think let me go down this route a little bit. So they said if you're a front-end developer, use a local service called MSW. I don't want to use that because I'm a full stack engineer, so I'd rather us do the actual work of the backend. And they said call your API from the front end application to display the grid. Now, so what I'm going to let us do is I'm going to talk about the model. I'm also going to look at the APIs that we wrote. And for the model, I love, 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 love a simple model. And here we didn't have to do too much work. We're using Tortoise. And Tortoise is able to export a couple of things for us, fields and models, right? Now for the fields, of course, it defines helps us define things like the type that we want. You can see integer there. You can see char, which is common. These are two common things. So varchar, char, integer, all these things are the type of database types that are very common, right? There is varchar. There's quite a number of them, right? There's datetime, yeah. So my my AI is working for me there. Let me see if I can bring more. All right, great. So that's pretty much a lot of the things that we could actually use. So datetime, timestamp, decimal, floats, boolean, it all depends on you and what you want to use and do in the database, right? JSON, I'm very sure for Postgres, if you're using Postgres, it will complain for other apps, maybe like a MySQL database, it will complain. You've got enums, um, and null for um, you know for a default field, for a default value of a field in case it accepts null. So whatever it is, those are the values that are possible in database, right? And of course, but you need to know what works for your database. Databases don't all accept the same kind of values. MySQL, Postgres started working with JSONB before um, MySQL, and I don't right now. I don't even think MySQL works with JSONB, and so on and on and on like that. And so primarily for the ID, we use integer because it's kind of like an increment. We don't need to do too many things. I would have used a UUID, but we don't need to do that because our app doesn't need that. So, and I also set it as the primary key. You can see PK true. Now for the so for the type is if you go to the setup, let me show you. The type is this bill of lading. It's a string, right? But a unique string. We didn't need to do too much. So for that, I just set it as max length this char field. Title, same thing here. Then position is an integer field. If you look at this, it's an integer. So, but it's an integer. However, no cats can have the same position. No two cats can have the same position. So what did I do? I set the unique to true. So, and you see the comment here, I said we need to make sure that the position is unique for each document, each cat. And if peradventure you try to save two cats in the same position, it should complain. I'll show you in the Postman and let you see how that works. This just literally exposes this is how you define what you want to expose for the model, right? Because the model data is here, but sometimes you don't want to expose things like password and all those kind of things, so you're able to filter those kind of things. Um, Now for the route, which I think is the last thing we'll talk about on the back end. Now the route is the most important part of this, if I do say so myself. Now, the first thing you want to do is you want to define the root. I like defining the root of things. I don't know why, but it helps me to say when I go to the endpoint. Let me check what the endpoint is again. I think the endpoint is okay. I think we can just use. Can we use 127? Uh, okay, go. So we're going to go to the yes. So this is literally it. So you don't have to guess anything. All right. So what do we have here? So when you call this, you don't have anything. Why don't we have anything here? You were expecting, I'm pretty sure you were expecting it to say, welcome to Zania API. No. The reason is because if you remember, on the main.py, we set the prefix to this, right? And so we have v1, right? And we have this. So um, if you are expecting, if you're constructing your APIs, you have to make sure that you are looking at the prefix that you're setting on it. Make sure that you're sure what prefix you're setting on it. If you're not using prefix, make sure you're checking for things like wildcards because those can actually be receiving things that you would not know. Right, that's important also. All right, so we have this. Now, one thing I would like to do is, can I get all the documents in this particular backend? Oh, nice. So if you look, what API did we call? We call this particular API, the one that has this. Yes, this one. Now, why did you call this particular API? Oh, in order to get all the endpoints, right? We have just simply queried the backend to do a all.all. By the way, this is from model, right? Document. Don't forget where this is coming from. This is coming from this file. Okay. So going back to the routes PY, we just call that document from the backend. The backend knows what model this is, and we did .all. Now there are many other methods that you can call on, the backend. For example, you can see, apart from all, you can see, let me show you what it looks like. You can see annotate, bulk create, bulk update, clone, delete, fetch. There's so many things. Now, if you do all, that's not, you would get everything you need, yes, but sometimes you might want to order by position. Now, this is, okay, so this is ordered by position, right? But we could say we want to order it by, um, let's say we want to order it by type, right? Um, by something else. All right. So if you do this, what happens? Um, yeah. So here we are ordering it by type. So you can see that it's using and the alphabetic order of the type. So bank BA comes before BI and BI comes before I in the alphabetic order, right? So that is one thing. That is one thing. There's so many functions and so many methods you can use. You have to look into that. Other people would rather write this code using raw SQL. That's my problem. But I'm writing this because I like to type the the queries or the models, right? Make sure that I'm using the correct thing, and just keeps it a little bit clean for me. Otherwise, I'll write the SQL in a file called services and bring the SQL itself, the string, and send, maybe add the variables on, apply the variables on it, and send it to the backend. So the next thing you want to do, of course, is can you pick each of this and call or find details about a single document. So say we want to just see the document, the details of the document 6562. We would just basically call, let's refresh the endpoint and what do we have here? So say we have this. All right, so we call that and we got this particular file. And that's what this is doing here. We are simply taking the ID from the query parameter here, and we are wrapping everything in a try catch, right? Make sure that in case this fails, we are able to handle it and say, oh, you know, we can't figure out what you're trying to do. But if we don't find that particular ID, for example, if it is this, we should be able to say this particular document was not found, right? And we'll raise the issue. Now, the other thing that we want to do is also make sure that by the time we do find it, right, this is awaited because it's an asynchronous transaction, and we return this to the user, right? And that's pretty much it. I think that's pretty much it. We could actually return this in a more cleaner way. For example, if you look at what we have here, we could actually return this in a body and return the status right beside it, and all of that. But this is, first of all, good enough. So, what else? I think having done this, one of the things that I realized whilst working on the front end, I will just go to the front end and just show you a couple of things, right? So, um, one of the requirements was that have the front end, right, call the REST API for saving every 5 seconds. Not on every action, but it should save after moving the cards up and down, right? It should save the current position because by the time we are moving it around, we are saving the position, we're changing the position. I'm also going to show you that. And then you should save those particular cards and their new positions every 5 seconds. It says display a spinner when it's saving. How long has passed since the last save? Avoid saving if no changes have been made. All right. Um, okay. So the first thing you want to do is you want to figure out uh, if So the first thing we want to figure out is we have to save it every 5 seconds. Um, and the first thing, if I search here, what have we done here? We created a use effect, right? Just specifically for this to make sure that we create an interval of 5 seconds. Now, in every 5 seconds, we are saving the documents to the particular endpoint. What particular endpoint? Um, Give me a second. Yeah. So to this particular endpoint. Now, here you can see that we're passing the API URL, but the true endpoint is slash bulk, right? And the idea is that we are saving this, making sure that it's going to this particular endpoint that takes all the new data at once. Now, two things would happen when you go to the backend. The very first thing is that on the bulk save, when you try to update the position, say you have changed something, when you try to update the position of two, for example, to one, but one is still one because, or even one is still one, but we are planning to also still change it to two. What is going to happen is that the DB is going to complain. Why? Because you're trying to change two to one, but one is still one. Two transactions cannot happen at the same time because it's an SQL transaction database. So to every transaction has to happen one after the other, right? And so because we put a unique constraint on this particular field, we can have position have one and then one before this is changed to two. So it's a complaint. So what did we do? We find all the we make sure we have all the cards we want to delete. That want to change the value that we send to the backend, right? We get everything in at once, right? You can see it here, documents, and we try to get the titles of these documents, and we say, okay, this is the card to delete. Now we take that and we find all these particular cards in the database and we delete them. We delete these records, right? Because they are about to be changed. But we have that database in application memory already. We have all that data in application memory already. And then we create everything at once in a bulk create. Why? Because we don't want to create it one by one and waste time. So we create it in a bulk create, excluding the IDs. Now the database will create new IDs for us. It's been incremented. You notice that the IDs will change. You can see that this has changed again. Why? Because we've done a bulk create. Now, having done that, if parameter something happens and this fails, we have to be able to make sure that we return an error to the backend. But if it goes and is successful and all these changes have been made, bulk update is completed successfully. And that's the way whatever change that you've done, either be it on here, or if it's 5,000 and you're able to make changes in just 500 of them, we'll still be able to update all of them accurately without any problems, right? Um, is there any other thing here? I think that's pretty much everything. Um, I think that's pretty much everything. The What is left to talk about? I think so. I haven't done that. The next thing you want to do is to make sure that you, since you're saving this, right? Make sure that um, your when you land on the page, right? The first thing that you do is you create a user effect to actually fetch all the data, right? So we have a user effect for that. Now that's fine. That should work. That works perfectly. The other thing is, of course, the sorting. Now, the sorting is very simple. I've done sortings over the years, but I used something called the React Sortable HOC. There's so many components and so many models out there, but I use this one for two reasons. Right? It works the way I would like to use it in terms of sorting elements that are supposed to be in a grid. right? I think that was the major reason why I used this. But because this particular thing changes, the item changes often, I use a use memo just to make this efficient, right? Same thing as the way I use the use callback is just to make this efficient. And in a bigger list, you feel it a lot. Here, it's not very insane. So I can almost remove this because if you remember, one of the things I said was don't try to over engineer things, right? So this might be one of those moments where you're over engineering things. If you're using this particular model, one of the things that you're supposed to do to make sure that you're able to click on the card is to implement something called a distance, right? When I didn't do that, I wasn't able to click on it. I was having issues. I think that was a major one. They did that because they put a prevent default function on it. Prevent default prevents, like the name says, you from automatically it prevents a component from automatically behaving the way it should, right? And then you can do your custom, you can create your custom behavior on it. And the axis is XY meaning horizontal and vertical, right? If you did only X, or you only have the X axis, and if you did only Y, you only have the Y axis. So type of movement. And that's pretty much it. So for the sorts on sort end, right? This particular function, what it's doing is again, like I said, is this is in charge of sorting. This is a function that you have to send to the list, by the way. This is in charge of sorting the items of the array, right? And one thing I did was, if you notice, I needed to change the position, not just to rearrange it, but I need to change position and store that position change in the backend. So I took the index, right, and stored that as the position, right. That way, we can always, you know, we can always be sure that we are taking and we are manipulating the position as we change things. If not, this will not change any position. And if you refresh it, your changes won't reflect on the back end because we have nowhere to store it. It's only happening on the front end, right? Okay, so that's pretty much about it. And every other thing is, the card within the list. And in case the items don't render, there are no items to render, you want to make sure you're catching that because that might be an issue, right? Um, and yeah, that's pretty much it. I think one of the things that you also want to do is to make sure that you did the Docker compose, right, for the application. Now, for me, they asked me to create a Docker compose file to start all the components as a microservice. And because I separated the project into front end and back end, it was very easy for me. All I had to do was create this Docker compose file, which is able to handle multiple Docker files. And so cd into the front end folder, copy all the files you need to create into the work directory here, and open the port 3000 for the front end, run the install, build it, and serve, right? And whilst, if you look at the file itself here, I'm actually installing the serve globally for us to actually use it and run, right? Same thing with the backend. I am seeding into the backend, copying all the files I need, including the SQLite database file, opening the 8000 port. And then when I run the file that is in the database folder, which is, if you check the Docker file here, which installs all the requirements we need, just the way we did the npm install, and we copy all the files into the app working directory. We then run the command to start the server. Now, one thing that you might have not done is to actually run the server with the build file. Many people will have run the server with the with the development file, which is just saying run npm run start. I don't think I don't think that might be a big problem, but I think that many senior engineers looking at would think you don't know the difference between working with a build file and working with a development file. Both of them are quite different. The build file is more performant. It takes an extra step to develop and compile it. If you look at it, it's a lot of jargons. You read it, but it's just a compiled version of what you're doing. And it loads faster and is meant for production. And that's pretty much everything. So yeah, that's the end of this particular process. Of course, I described other things in the README. If you want me to post the README, let me know, and I'll let you know about the decisions I made for this to work the way it's working. But yeah, again, if you need a CTO, a fractional CTO, I can help you to build your team. I can help you to build your first app, mobile application, web application, be front and the back end. Let me know. And if you are an engineering manager looking for someone to join your team and to help stabilize things, review code, get your servers and your infra up, I'm the one to message. Let me know. Okay. Enjoy the rest of your day. Next week, I'm coming up with another tutorial. So something that's very light, something that's very consumable that you can actually pick up and just like consume and ride along with me. I'll be doing a lot of this ride along. This is the very first episode. And catch you on the next episode.